Storytime about how I had to get a restraining order against my creepy neighbor. I found a good deal on a rental and moved into a new neighborhood. It seemed like a decent area and I was excited for a fresh start. My friend was helping me move my stuff into my new house when my neighbor noticed and came over to welcome me. He seemed nice, and he even offered to help us unload the heavy furniture, which I accepted. A couple nights later, someone rang my doorbell and it was him. He brought me a plate of cookies and welcomed me to the neighborhood again. I thought he was just friendly and trying to be nice, but he kept doing things for me. Whenever he mowed his lawn, he would come over and mow mine as well without asking. I told him he didn't have to do that, but he insisted and said it wasn't any trouble. He brought me over food every few nights and always said he made extra and wanted to share. I wanted him to stop, so I told him that I was going on a strict diet and politely declined the next time he tried it. At this point, I could tell he was being overly friendly and it started getting weird. One morning, I came outside and he was washing my car. I asked him what he was doing and he replied that he just finished washing his and figured he'd do mine as well. I told him I appreciate it, but I didn't want my car washed and he shouldn't have done it without my permission. Unfortunately, things kept getting weirder from here. Part 2 of why I had to get a restraining order against my creepy neighbor. My new neighbor kept doing unwanted favors for me. Whenever I asked him to stop, he would just ignore me and do it anyway. It got creepy when I got a package in the mail that I didn't order. It was a new keyboard that I was talking about getting myself for Christmas in my live stream on Twitch a few nights prior. No one on my Twitch stream had my address. Upon further inspection, there was a note inside the box that said, "Here's that new keyboard you were talking about, from your neighbor Jim." I never told Jim about my Twitch account, and I had no clue he watched it, which led me to believe he'd been looking me up online. I was super creeped out at this point and was going to tell him to leave me alone for good the next time I saw him. The last straw was when I came home from work and this man was hanging up Christmas lights on my house for the holidays. I was shocked. I got out of the car and immediately went off on him. I threatened to call the police and get a restraining order on him if he didn't leave me alone. Apparently, he didn't get the message because he sent me flowers with an apology card the next day and tried to contact me on 3 social media platforms. I contacted the police when he wouldn't stop and filed for a civil harassment restraining order. After this, Jim stopped, but I still ended up moving a couple months later to get away from him. Part 2 of why I had to get a restraining order against my creepy neighbor. My new neighbor kept doing unwanted favors for me. Whenever I asked him to stop, he would just ignore me and do it anyway. It got creepy when I got a package in the mail that I didn't order. It was a new keyboard that I was talking about getting myself for Christmas in my live stream on Twitch a few nights prior. No one on my Twitch stream had my address. Upon further inspection, there was a note inside the box that said, "Here's that new keyboard you were talking about, from your neighbor Jim." I never told Jim about my Twitch account, and I had no clue he watched it, which led me to believe he'd been looking me up online. I was super creeped out at this point and was going to tell him to leave me alone for good the next time I saw him. The last straw was when I came home from work and this man was hanging up Christmas lights on my house for the holidays. I was shocked. I got out of the car and immediately went off on him. I threatened to call the police and get a restraining order on him if he didn't leave me alone. Apparently, he didn't get the message because he sent me flowers with an apology card the next day and tried to contact me on 3 social media platforms. I contacted the police when he wouldn't stop and filed for a civil harassment restraining order. After this, Jim stopped, but I still ended up moving a couple months later to get away from him. This is how I found out my childhood best friend was a ghost. I grew up with a girl named Katie Wells. I lived on a farm and Katie lived with an old woman named Irene in the next house over. Katie and Irene weren't related, but whenever I asked Katie about her, she would just change the subject. It seemed like they never got along because they never talked to each other. Katie seemed really sheltered and I thought it was because Irene wouldn't let her do much. Whenever I would talk about boys or a new celebrity crush I had or even a new popular TV show, she never knew what I was referring to. A while later, my mom ended up quitting her job and working from home, so she didn't take me to Katie's house to have Irene watch me anymore. I remember wanting to go over to see Katie, and I asked my mom a few times, but she always said no. I eventually made new friends, and me and Katie grew apart. A couple years went by, and I started to realize I never saw Katie around anymore. She used to talk about her dad, Pat, a lot, so I assumed she went to live with him. I saw Irene outside one day, and I asked her how Katie was doing and where she'd been. However, she just looked at me like I was crazy. She told me that she had no idea who Katie was and that no one has ever lived with her. I told Irene about how we used to play together at her house, and she gave me a weird look and asked me if I was feeling okay. This is when things got strange. Part 2 of how I found out my childhood best friend was a ghost. The more details I told Irene about Katie, the more she looked at me like I was mental. She assured me it was just me and her in the house when my mom would drop me off. I was shocked. I went home and asked my mom about Katie, and she gave me the same confused look Irene just gave me and told me she didn't know what I was talking about. I couldn't believe it. How was I the only one who remembered her? I was starting to think I was going insane. It even crossed my mind that maybe Katie was an imaginary friend that I made up when I was little. However, I vividly remember playing with her every time I went over. I thought about it for days and I couldn't get it out of my head. The mystery kept me up at night and I even dreamt about my old childhood friend. I decided to do some research on Irene's house and my heart sank to my stomach when I realized what happened. I discovered the first person to ever own the house was a man named Patrick Wells back in 1941. I tried to find anything I could on Katie, but nothing came up. I remember Katie talking about her dad Pat when I was younger. It finally made sense how she never knew about any recent events I would bring up and why her and Irene would never communicate. I realized that I was the only one who saw Katie because she wasn't alive. I had been playing with a spirit all that time growing up. Storytime about the most outrageous thing I saw working as a waitress. A guy came in with his date one night and throughout the evening he was the picture of courtesy and good manners. I appreciated it, but didn't delude myself that I was the source and figured he was just in a good mood because the date was going well. He was certainly in a celebratory mood because he was sparing no expense. He asked for our highest quality wine, she got our most expensive entree, and he even ordered one of every appetizer for her to sample when she made a remark that she was having trouble deciding. It was a real feast. So the evening starts wrapping up and I get their check. I asked if they'd be paying together or separate, and she starts to say separate, but he makes a big deal of saying, "Oh, are you kidding me? Together, definitely together. You never have to pay when you're with me, babe." Then he slides me his card. I get everything sorted and bring out the receipt. It's almost a $300 bill. He doesn't even blink and makes a big show of leaving a $100 tip. He thanks me for my service and emphasizes what a lovely night they've had. A tip that size is exceptional, so I thanked him profusely. He said there's no need and goes on to say how underappreciated waitstaff are and says, "Don't plan to tip, don't eat out, you know?" Looking at the mesmerized girl the whole time and not giving me a glance. After that, he helps her into her coat and they go off. However, not even a few minutes later, he comes back and what he says leaves me speechless. Part 2 of the most outrageous thing I saw while working as a waitress. So about 90 seconds later, he's back in the door without her, going, "I think I left my..." Then when the door shut and looking to make sure she was out of earshot, he goes, without the slightest shade of shame or embarrassment, "Mark the tip down to $20, hun. I was just playing it up for my date. You understand." Then turns to leave. I understood, but not how he hoped I would. However, I couldn't make a scene in the middle of work. That's not my place, so I just said one more time in order to give his conscience a chance to sink in. "Okay, sir, you'd like to amend your tip from $100 to $20, is that correct?" Even though I didn't show any displeasure in my voice, he shot back extremely hostile, "Yes, and if I see a cent over 20 on there, I'm going to dispute the whole meal with my credit vendor, so don't try to pull anything." The most frustrating part of this for me was not even going from over a 30% tip to a 10% tip, but rather that this poor girl was being strung along with no idea of who this guy was behind her back. It was extremely manipulative of him, which is a major red flag. I really wanted to show that girl the trick he just pulled, but I was at work and it wasn't my place. However, just in time, something occurred to me and I darted outside hoping to catch him in the parking lot. Part 3 of the most outrageous thing I saw while working as a waitress. I got lucky because he parked on the street and he was dealing with the parking meter. I flagged him down and ran across the street, nearly stumbling into traffic in my haste for this delicious moment. His date was already in the car but rolled her window down since no one expects the waitress to follow you to your car waving her arms like a crazy person. I made it across and said more than loudly enough for her to hear, "Sir, we amended your tip from $100 down to $20 as you requested, but you'll need to fill out a different receipt reflecting your new total for our records. This is just a bookkeeping regulation that goes way above me. It has nothing to do with you retroactively downgrading your tip from $100 to $20. We're just glad you enjoyed your evening." His jaw was on the floor. He tried to pretend like he didn't know what I was talking about, giving me some line about how I must be after someone else since he only came back because he forgot his keys. However, I wouldn't let it rest. The more he played dumb, the more I repeated versions of, "You wanted me to change your tip from $100 to $20, you came back in," and so on. He finally went, "Okay, whatever, sorry for the miscommunication. If you need me to fill out a new receipt, I can." I'm guessing he didn't have the money in his account because he signed the new receipt. His girlfriend was visibly shocked and he was staring daggers through me. You could feel the rage emanating off of him. Then they drove off. Hopefully he'll never do that again. Imagine thinking that you're helping out a family friend, but they end up abducting you instead. This was the reality for a 15-year-old girl in Minnesota named Jasmine Block. An acquaintance of her family, a man named Thomas Barker, approached her on the night of August 8th, 2017 and told her that he needed help with a family situation. Since she knew him, she got in his car and he drove her to his house. Once they were inside, her nightmare began. Barker quickly tied her up with zip ties and then invited his roommate Joshua Holby and a third friend, Stephen Powers, to repeatedly assault her. These three men assaulted her and threatened her with weapons for a month. They didn't leave her side for 29 days and during this time she was kept in a bedroom closet. There were two different instances when they attempted to drown her in the bathtub, holding her head underwater, but she fought to stay alive. Another time during her captivity, they forced her to stand on a bucket with a rope around her neck and pushed her off the bucket until she couldn't breathe. A week into her kidnapping, there was a glimmer of hope when Barker had invited Powers to hang out with him but told him not to enter his room while staying over. One day, Powers decided to take a peek and found Block in the closet but never reported it. A few weeks after this, police knocked on the door to investigate a stolen vehicle, but no one answered. This is when the three men decided to shove Block into a duffel bag and move her to another location. Crime Fanatic Friday Part 2. Thomas Barker, Joshua Holby, and Stephen Powers took Jasmine Block to another location 30 miles away. They told her they were going to get food and would be back in an hour. This is the first time in 29 days that they had left her alone. She knew this might be her only opportunity at freedom and bravely took it. She ran door to door for help, but no one answered. That's when she spotted a property across a lake. She got in the water and swam across a portion of the 150-acre lake, sprinting through a field until she came to a residential area. That's when she came across a farmer who recognized her right away from the missing persons flyers in the area. She told him that she had been kidnapped and needed help. He helped her in his truck as he quickly called the police. When the police arrived, Block was getting out of the farmer's truck and entering the deputy's car when she recognized the car of one of her captors. Stephen Powers, Barker's friend who had found Block a week into her kidnapping in the closet but didn't report it, was immediately arrested right then and there. Thomas Barker and Joshua Holby were arrested shortly after. Barker was sentenced to 24 years in prison. Holby and Powers only got 8 years. Block later went on Dr. Phil to describe her kidnapping and multiple murder attempts. Dr. Phil offered to help Block overcome the after effects of her experience, which she accepted. Story time about the weirdest things to happen while working as a stripper. I was giving a $25 dance in a busy room filled with other dancers. It was the room for the cheap customers, so there weren't any dividers. Just a big room filled with armchairs and people watching each other get private dances. At this specific club, dancers were required to remove our shoes during private dances so we wouldn't damage the armchairs. We usually put our shoes and whatever else under the chair so that nobody would mess with them while we were busy. After the private dances, my guy and the guy next to me are the only ones to buy a second dance. The rest of the girls clear out and it's just me and another girl. When I look over, the other guy is sniffing the sole of the girl's shoe behind her back while she's grinding on him. We make eye contact and he drops her shoe. I don't want to ruin my own private dance by saying something, so I ignored it and just continued to do my thing. They were only 3 feet away, so it was hard not to notice things. I look over again and he's doing it again. He noticed me looking and dropped the shoe, looking away. Finally, a third time I look over and this dude is giving the heel of her stripper shoe a freaking BJ, all while making eye contact with me. This time, he holds eye contact and intensely stares at me. That's when I got creeped out and avoided him the rest of the night. I also never told the girl that her shoe had been defiled. Part 2 of the weirdest things to happen while working as a stripper. One night, there was an older gentleman around 55 years old buying lots of double dances. He was tipping generously and even buying everyone in the bar a round of drinks at some point. It was around 1 in the morning when this large, curly, red-haired lady smashes down onto the push and door lever as hard as humanly possible. Every patron in the club turned and looked at the door. She stood there in all her glory with a red fried perm, mom jeans, and thick framed glasses. I could instantly tell that she was seething with anger. She was on a mission and stormed towards the back of the club where the VIP rooms were, all while shouting, Derek, where the F are you?" The bouncer immediately notices and runs towards the back, trying to stop her from causing any problems. However, it was too late. She swings the VIP room door open and sees him in there with 2 girls getting a double dance. She immediately grabs him by the arm and starts yanking him towards the door, all while smacking him repeatedly. She pulls him out into the parking lot and then into her car. That was the last we ever saw of generous old Derek.